It was a bitter night in the city, the kind of night that made even the stars seem to shiver behind the clouds. The wind slithered through alleyways and undercoats, stealing warmth with invisible fingers. Outside a dimly lit coffee shop, a man sat hunched over on a bench, his shoulders curled forward as though shielding himself from more than just the cold. He wore a tailored suit, now wrinkled and slightly stained, his once polished shoes dulled by grime and despair. His face, though still handsome in a rugged, weary kind of way, bore the heavy lines of recent turmoil. His name was Daniel Moore, once a celebrated venture capitalist, now a man freshly fallen from a pedestal he didn't realize he had been balancing on so precariously. If you're watching this story now, let me tell you, sometimes it takes losing everything to find the one thing that truly matters. And sometimes, help comes not from a boardroom, but from a child in rags, offering something far more valuable than money. So stay with me, because this story? It's not about power or success. It's about warmth. It's about grace. And you won't forget what happens next. Daniel stared blankly into the city's cold heart, his breath curling like ghosts in the freezing air. He had nowhere to go. After the scandal, the firm cut ties. After the firm, his so-called friends disappeared. His accounts were frozen. His penthouse was seized. And his fiancée, well, she had left the moment the private jet stopped fueling up. Everything had slipped through his fingers like sand, and now he sat with nothing but a bitter latte he couldn't afford and a silence that pressed heavier than the night air. That's when he heard her. Soft, hesitant footsteps. The kind that don't want to disturb the world. He turned slightly, not really expecting anything. That's when he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her coat was several sizes too big, torn at the seams, one sleeve hanging by a thread. She wore mismatched shoes and carried a battered backpack held together with duct tape and hope. Her cheeks were flushed red from the cold, her small hands trembling, but her eyes, big, brown, and solemn, held a kind of gentle wisdom he hadn't seen in years. She stopped a few feet from him and tilted her head. "You look cold, mister," she whispered, barely loud enough to rise above the wind. Her voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken much recently. Then, without waiting for him to respond, she opened her bag and pulled out an old, faded blanket. It was patchy and worn thin, but she walked forward and held it out to him with both hands. "You can use my blanket." Daniel blinked, stunned. At first, he thought she might be asking for help. But here she was, this tiny thing, offering him help. He stared at the blanket, then at her. I can't take that," he murmured, his voice cracked from disuse and emotion. "You need it more than I do." She shook her head, her matted curls bobbing. "You look sadder than I feel. And cold too. You can give it back later, if you want." He didn't know what overtook him in that moment, perhaps it was the absurdity of it all, perhaps it was the raw, unfiltered kindness, but he took the blanket with trembling hands and draped it over his shoulders. It smelled faintly of detergent and street life, a mix of warmth and dust. And somehow, it made him feel more human than anything had in weeks. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lila," she said simply. "What's yours?" He hesitated. "Daniel." "Okay, Mr. Daniel," she said with a tired smile. "I'll be over there if you need anything." She pointed to a cardboard setup under the awning of an abandoned bookstore across the street. "That's my spot." And just like that, she turned and walked away, hugging her thin arms around herself and disappearing into the shadows. Daniel watched her go, a knot tightening in his chest. He didn't sleep that night. He sat with the blanket wrapped around him, staring at the dark sky, haunted by a new thought: how could someone with nothing still have something left to give? Daniel didn't sleep that night, not just because of the cold, but because of the way that little girl's words echoed in his mind: "You can give it back later, if you want." It had been a long time since someone gave him anything without expecting something in return. That morning, as the city slowly roused itself into a dull haze of motion and horns and tired faces, he walked stiffly across the street to the spot where she had said she'd be, under the awning of the old bookstore. But she wasn't there. Just a piece of cardboard, a few crumbs from what might have been her dinner, and a small, scribbled note: "Back soon. Don't go." It was written in childish handwriting, with a little heart drawn at the bottom. Daniel sat down and waited, wrapped in her blanket, ignoring the stares of passing strangers. Hours passed. He didn't know why, but something deep inside him, something buried under years of profit margins and pride, kept him rooted there like an old oak refusing to fall. And then, just after noon, she returned, skipping lightly with a crumpled brown paper bag in her hand. "You waited," she said, beaming. She handed him the bag. Inside were 2 apples and half a muffin. "You need to eat," she said, "you looked even hungrier than me." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Where did you get this?" he asked gently. "Church bin," she said simply, then sat cross-legged beside him, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. They sat there and shared the muffin in silence. And from that moment, something changed in him. He didn't know it yet, but this girl was about to become the most important person in his life. Over the next few days, they formed a strange routine. Every morning, Lila would vanish for a few hours and return with bits of food. She always made sure Daniel ate first. She talked a lot about squirrels she saw, stories she made up, people she'd observed. And Daniel, a man who once commanded boardrooms with icy logic, found himself listening with childlike wonder. He found warmth in her laughter and hope in her resilience. Eventually, he asked her why she was alone. She hesitated at first, eyes darkening slightly. Then, one quiet night, she finally told him. Her mom had died of pneumonia 2 winters ago. They had been living in a shelter, but after her death, Lila was passed to a distant aunt who had only taken her in for the benefits. When the checks stopped, so did the roof over her head. Lila ran away. She'd been on the streets ever since. Daniel's chest ached as he listened. He had spent years chasing money, and this girl had been chasing shelter. He suddenly hated the man he had been, powerful, yes, but blind. Blind to this entire side of life. But then Lila said something that shattered him completely. "You know," she whispered, "you remind me of my dad. He used to get real quiet when he was sad. But he always came back stronger." Daniel looked at her. "Where is he?" Her face fell. "Don't know. He left when I was little." And just like that, the silence between them became deeper, not awkward, but sacred. One afternoon, Daniel walked to the public library to search the internet. Using a visitor terminal, he looked up legal aid groups, child welfare advocates, shelters. Something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He wanted to protect her. That evening, he returned to Lila and told her they were going to the police station. She resisted at first, terrified they'd put her in a terrible group home. But he promised he wouldn't let her disappear into the system. They went together. And as they sat in the station lobby, Daniel told the officer everything, his fall from grace, how she'd helped him, how he wanted to help her now. Something about the truth in his eyes convinced the officer to get social services involved. Within hours, a caseworker named Maria arrived. She knelt in front of Lila and spoke gently, promising they'd find her a safe place. Daniel stayed the night outside the group home, sitting in the cold, holding the blanket she had once given him. He didn't sleep again. Not out of worry, but because his mind was racing. The next morning, he walked into the city and found a day labor center. He scrubbed floors, moved boxes, even washed dishes. It didn't matter what it was, he needed to feel useful again. Days turned into weeks. He got back on his feet. Slowly. Painfully. But each time he wanted to quit, he thought of her face, her voice, her sacrifice. That blanket was always folded in his small rented room, a reminder of why he was changing. Then came the day he never expected. Daniel was hired as a consultant by a startup run by a former intern who had idolized him. The CEO remembered how Daniel had once gone out of his way to mentor him, back when Daniel had everything. Now, in a full-circle twist of fate, that young man gave him a job, no questions asked. From there, it snowballed. Daniel saved every penny. His clothes improved. His posture returned. But his soul remained different. He no longer lived for power. He lived for purpose. And 3 months later, with stable income and a lawyer's help, Daniel filed for temporary custody of Lila. It wasn't easy. He had to prove himself. His past was a mess, his accounts still under review. But he showed the court every text, every note, every reference. Most importantly, he told them the truth: she saved me first. When the judge finally signed the papers granting him temporary custody, Daniel broke down in tears. He had once ruled over empires of wealth. But now, with this signature, he held something greater than gold: a chance to give a little girl a home again. That night, Lila walked into her new bedroom. She looked around, wide-eyed, touching everything like it might vanish. On her bed was a brand new blanket. Pink, fluffy, warm. She ran to it. But under her pillow, she found something else. Folded neatly. Her old blanket, the one she had given him. And on it, a note in Daniel's handwriting: "You gave me warmth when I had none. Now let me give you a life where you'll never need to give yours away again." Months passed. Seasons changed. Daniel's reputation was slowly restored, but he didn't chase the spotlight anymore. He spent mornings making pancakes, evenings reading bedtime stories. Lila enrolled in school. She painted pictures and made friends. They laughed often. And every year, on the anniversary of that cold night, they went back to the bench where it all began. They'd sit, side by side, with a thermos of cocoa and that old blanket between them. Not because they needed it, but because it reminded them of who they used to be, and how far they had come. That one moment of compassion had rewritten both their lives. And every time someone asked Daniel how he turned his life around, he'd smile and say, "A little girl gave me a blanket. And with it, she gave me back my heart."